Welcome to ProCast, a space created by the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service, the Office of Public Procurement Policy to be specific, where we speak about topical issues in public procurement with thought leaders, industry experts, and procurement practitioners on a wide range of informative issues relating to public procurement. There's a buzzword in public procurement now, the CPEP. That's the Contractor and Consultant Performance Evaluation Program. And who better today than one of the leading experts in the field, Ms. Cheyenne McClarty, to really explain that to us today. Ms. Cheyenne McClarty, she is the Senior Director in the Contractor Performance Monitoring Branch in the Public Procurement Commission. And it's our pleasure to have Ms. McClarty here today, where we'll be discussing these issues in greater detail. Cheyenne, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here with you.
Now, let's delve right into the topic at hand. Why did the government of Jamaica implement a CPEP, that's the Contractor and Consultant Performance Evaluation Program, and what key issues does it aim to address?
Well, the CPEP is important because it's coming from an arena of lack of progress or lack of success in contracts and projects that we have been having continually in the public sector. And so it was felt that there needs to be a formalized or standardized structure of looking at the performance of our contractors and consultants as they're working so that we can get better contract and project progress going forward. And so one of the big ticket items is performance. It's also about monitoring and evaluation. Are we tracking what is happening in our contracts? Do we know what our deliverables are and how they're being performed? And so all that activity around GOJ implementing the CPEP is about monitoring, evaluation, and performance.
Okay, wonderful. So why and how is the PPC involved in the CPEP system?
The PPC became involved in the CPEP system as a new mandate, which was provided to the Public Procurement Commission subsequent to the approval by Cabinet of the Contractor and Consultant Performance Evaluation Policy in February 2023. The PPC was working with the Office of Public Procurement Policy in the ministry to help develop the policy and pilot areas that would go into the program. But once the process was approved by Cabinet, the PPC got the full mandate to proceed. It is also noted that in the policy document, the PPC is the regulator in response to the CPEP. So we are involved and have oversight for the day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month activity and setting the goals, the standards, the work routine, the workflows for the CPEP going forward.
Okay, so that speaks to a great deal of responsibilities that the PPC has in enabling that the system actually works. Can you explain for our viewers what the role of the ministries, departments, and agencies are in the CPEP process, and what are their key responsibilities in managing the CPEP program?
The ministries, departments, and agencies are extremely key to this process. They provide the main throughput into the system. In ministries, departments, and agencies, they're the ones who have contracts with contractors and consultants in respect of the provision of goods, works, and services. And so as they have the contracts, they're also monitoring the work that is going on the contracts. How that plays in terms of the CPEP is that there are two processes that ministries, departments, and agencies need to do to be compliant with the process. They need to register their contracts that are over the threshold that has been set by Cabinet, which is now 10 million Jamaican dollars, as well as according to some exceptions to the threshold that have also been set. And then subsequent to registering their contracts, they will now be reporting on the performance of their contractors and consultants under contract from the moment that the contract starts to the moment that the contract ends. And that provides quite a lot of information on the process, and those responsibilities are the main throughput of the MDAs. They are also going to be appointing assessors within their entities. Those are persons who will be doing the actual evaluations, and so different aspects of their staff routine, whether it is their head of procurement, their head of entity, their assessors, will all play some function in undertaking the CPEP in their organizations.
Certainly, that sounds like a great deal of capacity building has to take place to enable the proper functioning of the CPEP system. Could you speak to the kind of training or capacity building that exists for personnel that's involved in the CPEP system, please?
Since the passing of the circular by the Ministry of Finance and Public Service in December 2023, the PPC has been having a program of sensitization, onboarding to the data visualization and business intelligence platform, the DVBI, as well as training amongst ministries, departments, and agencies. To date, we have done almost 200 entities and several dozen sessions. And in those sessions, what we seek to do is to have entities understand what the policy is about, what the program is about, what are the reports, when they are to be submitted, what do they cover, how do you make the reports, what validation information needs to be put in them, and then what happens on the platform. How do you register a contract? How do you do your performance evaluation? And so for PPC, we have been having sessions inside entities. We have been having sessions at external locations so that we can literally in person assist entities to know, understand, and act. So they can do their reports, so they can register their contracts, and that the different areas in their organization, since this is broader than just the procurement team, it involves their technical teams as well, and so it's important for the broader team within the agency. So in these sessions, not only do we seek to sensitize the procurement function and the persons thereof, but all the other types of functions who hold contracts. Because what is very important for the training is that we train persons who have some touch point on a contract, from before the contract is developed to when the contract is signed and through the life of the contract until the contract ends. So once you are creating the contract, preparing the contract, signing the contract, monitoring or evaluating actions within the contract, checking the deliverables, auditing the contract, closing the contract, it is important that you have some knowledge of the CPEP and your responsibilities thereof in that cycle.
Oh, it's an entire process flow then that's integrated within the CPEP system. I've heard you mention earlier about business intelligence and data management. How is technology integrated into the CPEP system?
All the reports or all the activity that is done in the CPEP is done electronically. There is a special platform that was built by the PPC for this process. It is called the Data Visualization and Business Intelligence Platform, the DVBI platform. And once you are on the platform, you are now able to do the work for the CPEP. So as part of the training process, we give the teams and the individuals that have been approved by their head of entity credentials to go on the platform. And it is on this platform that you would register your contract. So you would have the requisite forms. You don't need to be putting any general information in an email and attaching it and sending it to PPC. You will register your contract on the portal with objective information about your contract. And then thereafter, when you're doing your performance evaluation, the information for the report is already on the platform in the terms of forms. So you will answer the forms that there are, and you will then submit substantiating or validating information for your report, which will then be pushed to both your contractor or consultant as well as the PPC as your report. All of that workflow, both of those workflows take place on the technology, which is the DVBI platform.
Okay, but as it speaks now to the contractor registration process or the contract evaluation for the contractors and consultants, could you take us through the workflow for those two processes?
When you are doing a contract registration, the very first thing you need is your signed contract. Because if your contract is not ratified, if it's still in development, it is not ready to be put on the platform. And so once you have your signed contract, and that contract is developed from two modalities, it is either over Jamaican $10 million, which is the threshold set by Cabinet, or it's one of the three exceptions to the threshold, meaning it's an emergency contract under the rules of emergency contracts. It is a contract that has been terminated for cause, or it is a contract that was developed by a procurement process with special and differential treatment to a micro, small, or medium-sized enterprise and MSME. So those are the three exceptions to the threshold, meaning all values count, or we're talking about contracts over $10 million. Once you have that contract and you have your credentials, you log into the platform and you follow the windows to put on the information. Now, all the information in the contract registration section is objective information. It's about your name of contract, value of contract, the things that you would find in your contract document or nearby. You will also be uploading information to verify that your contract exists, such as your signing page for your contract. Once you have finished that workflow, your contract registration is finished. And when you press send, when an assessor presses send, it goes to head of procurement. And when head of procurement has reviewed and pushes that information, it comes straight to the PPC. Okay. So that is the start and end for the contract registration process.
It's contract registration. Mm-hmm.
For the performance evaluation, that is now done on a schedule that is in the policy document that has been set by cabinet. So for example, if there is an 8-month contract, what would be required is 2 interim reports during the life of the contract, from the date signed to the dates finished, and 1 report within 30 days after the contract is finished. So 3 reports would be needed for that performance evaluation. Similar to the contract registration, the assessor would sign on to the platform with their credentials. They would click on the contract that they've already registered, and your performance spectrum would appear. They would do their performance, upload the validation information matching the performance indicators that are on the report. Once they have pressed send, the workflow from the assessor goes to the head of procurement. After the head of procurement vets, it goes to head of entity. And once that process is finished, in terms of vetting, it is then pushed to the Public Procurement Commission, as well as to the impacted contractor or consultant whose work is now being looked at in terms of performance.
Mm-hmm. Wow, this is certainly game-changing, because you're speaking to the integration of the process flows with enabling technology and feedback loops for the procuring entities to really observe. This is absolutely game-changing in the procurement space. Now, I'd like you to also explain what responsibilities the procuring entities have within the CPEP program itself, or the CPEP system.
Quite a lot of different types of responsibilities. The appointment or of assessors within their system, so they must know who are the persons internally, because the policy speaks to assessors being internal personnel, who will be the assessors in their entity who will be doing these evaluations. Head of procuring entity is basically the sounding board within the system. They will keep the register of assessors and know what the assessors are working on. And of course, knowing the different other areas in your entity, whether it's legal, audit, technical, administration, plausibly those are going to be the departments or units or branches with the contracts. They also have to be aware of what is in the contracts, the performance indicators in the contracts, what will be tracked during the contracts, so that when assessors are requiring information about the performance during a certain period, they will be tapping those technical leads within the entity so that they can perform their reporting function.
Okay. You speak of key performance indicators, so that certainly means that there should be metrics behind those key performance indicators. What metrics or key performance indicators are most critical in evaluating contractor performance? What do you think?
Well, in this case, those key performance indicators, we call them literally performance indicators. They have already been set by cabinet. And so the performance indicators that are going to be used are going to be the same for all ministries, departments, and agencies. There is a master level of indicators. As an example, the consultancy indicators that were set by cabinet are administration, execution, and staffing. If you are doing works, it's administration, execution, staffing, cost control, and safety, as well as quality. And so those are your master indicators. And in our policy document, those are defined and examples are given. Now, when you have your contract on the ground or you have your procurement being developed, you would know, depending on the type of procurement that you're doing, which indicator you would be using. So if you're going out for consultancy services, you're procuring consultancy services to do something, then you would be using the performance indicator that has been designated for performance, for consultancy services. If you're going out for a works project, you would be using the performance indicator set that was designed for the works set. And so because those indicators are already established, in terms of the performance indicator matrix that now needs to be developed for bidding purposes and contracting purposes, it's about what does administration mean in this procurement or contract. Because if we have two different procurements or two different contracts, administration or execution will mean very different things. And so entities will break down their measures according to what is expected when that contract is on the ground, and that will be also told to our bidders. So we have clear and transparent processes, and they're aware from the start of the procurement what performance would be required of the contractor consultant who gets the contract and how that work will do from start to end of the contract.
Okay. And what I hear you saying is that it's quantifiable, measurable indicators that are used. So we're removing a great degree of subjectivity. Why is it important for us to use quantifiable measurements within the CPEP program?
Well, quantifiable measurements allows for better measurements, as you said. It allows for us to really define what work is being done, allows us to define words that we generally use like late. So what is late? Is it 1 day after, 1 month after, 6 months after, 24 hours after? And when we start putting numbers to many of these areas that we have just been speaking generally about, we can now define what is happening. And especially when we look at the risk involved in certain processes within certain contracts, this is particularly important, because a little bit off could be very significant, while in another contract, a little bit off is not, but what is a little bit off? And that is what we are trying to measure. And that's not just on that side, it's also on the opposite side. When is it very good? So you have what is required. As we know when we do our procurement or our contract, we also know what is not happening or what is a little bit off, and also when is it really, really good.
Okay. So with this removal of subjectivity, I'm sure contractors and consultants will be very pleased. So what are the top 3 things you'd say that contractors and consultants can do to actually increase or improve their CPEP score?
They can make sure, firstly, that they are aware and cognizant of their performance indicators. So they would have a performance indicator matrix, and that performance indicator matrix would be what they are supposed to be doing their work to. So they should be, 1, very aware of what's in the matrix. 2, internal to their processes, they should have some mechanism, whether it's an electronic mechanism, whether it is a staffing mechanism, whether it's an organizational mechanism, so they know that these are the deliverables that they need to meet, and they're tracking their own workflow. They're tracking their own deliverables, their own timing, so that they know what is happening internally. And if there is a problem, then they can communicate or collaborate with the procuring entity to see how they can rectify. So it's not just I saw something but I didn't report it and I wasn't tracking, so I didn't even realize that I was running late. The third thing is communication. They should be communicating and giving feedback on their work and their scores, so that they can understand what needs to be improved, what is working well, what could be working better, and how that reflects on the work. And because we're doing interim reports, not just reports at the start or the end, there is the means of improvements along the line. So if something goes off at one point, especially if this is at the start of the contract, there is a possibility to improve that over time as we're doing the tracking and the interim reports.
Okay. But that feedback from the contractors and the consultants, how is that feedback regarding their evaluations handled? Who treats with that? Who really handles those sort of feedback and concerns?
Well, there are different areas of feedback. When a report is complete and pushed to PPC by a procuring entity, there is a 30-day clock that starts because contractors and consultants have that opportunity to review their reports before it gets pushed into the registry. So PPC will not be automatically putting a report that is completed from a procuring entity into the registry because that 30-day window is there. In that 30-day window, a contractor or consultant can track back to the entity because that is where that main feedback goes. They're the ones that would be tracking what is happening on the project or the contract, and if there are any changes that need to be made to reporting scores, it can be done at that time. If there is a conflict, there is a ladder of conflict resolution which goes through the entity from the what you would call the lower levels, the owner levels, where the problem starts, probably in a particular branch or department, through the entity to head of entity. And if it is not able to be resolved at head of entity, it can flow to the Board of Commissioners at the PPC at its highest level in terms of conflict resolution. And this is in regards to matters of performance or conflict regarding performance or reporting on performance. So there are different opportunities for feedback, and separate from those areas of feedback, there is also feedback during process, whether you're doing monthly meetings, kickoff meetings, conversations, discussions, emails on what is happening during the life of the project. It's good that there is constant communication between the procuring entity and the contractor or consultant, and it's not just around the time that the report is due that communication occurs. So there are lots of different areas that feedback and communication can happen in the process.
Okay. Perhaps give us an example then of what sorts of feedback would happen in a scenario and how it would be treated. So the contractors and consultants who are listening in on this podcast, they'd have a better understanding of how their feedback is really treated.
Well, if, for example, there is a report, an interim report is done for a particular contract, and the contractor is not happy with the score. So they've gotten a score, they expected that they would have gotten a different score, probably a higher score, and they got a lower score than they anticipated they would have gotten. The first part is that they would have called, for example, the contract manager or inside the entity to see how or where or what was happening when that score was developed, and have that conversation to see if there was anything missing. Did the entity not review anything? Was there deliverables that didn't come over? Is there any means of redress in terms of the score? Can the score be changed in this event? Because that would plausibly be that conversation. The contractor would say, look, I did this amount of work, and I believe that this amount of work plausibly warrants this score, but you have given me something else. In one scenario, in the middle of that conversation, that score could be changed if that discussion leads to the PE going, okay, I see this, maybe I didn't see this at the time, it didn't come in, but I've seen that this work is there, and I am going to add X amount of points to your score. So that is one aspect that could happen. Now, if it is an area where that does not happen and you're going through the ladders, then you would be continually going, so the stages of the ladders, at the first level, that would be the branch or the department that has the contract. And if that's unresolved, the matter moves to the procurement committee to assist with resolution. If it is unable to be resolved at the level of the procurement committee, it can go through alternate dispute resolution mechanisms that the entity may have, and if that does not work, it then goes to head of entity. Head of entity, if at that level the resolution is not found, the matter can be now transferred to the PPC as basically a appeal to a poor performance score, if you would call it that. And then the discussion and the information would then be provided to the Board of Commissioners for a decision to be made. Once the Board of Commissioners makes a decision as per the policy, it is final, and that information is then relayed back to the procuring entity and to the contractor.
Okay. That's a lot. There's a lot going on. Shan. But we want to understand, though, at what stage of the implementation of this program, what stage are you at now?
We are at the stage where we have trained, onboarded, and sensitized quite a bit of the public sector. So almost 200 ministries, departments, and agencies, MDAs, and quite a lot of members of their teams. We have also started with our contractors and consultants, and what we're expecting to go forward with, particularly in the next financial year, is building the awareness and sensitization and their training, because the private sector is also on the platform. They will also get onboarding credentials to go on the DVBI. That is where they will be reviewing their reports, and that will also move into the next financial year. We started doing some sensitization of this process coming forward around 2021 when we were in development mode. And now we're going to go back and do it even more heavily, because our contracts are in two halves. Procuring entities have one half, and the contractors and consultants have the other half. So it is very important that both sides of the coin are very aware and cognizant, understand what happens in the process, what the performance indicators are, what needs to be done by either group, what they each do on the platform, and what their outputs and outcomes are.
Okay, and that certainly sounds like you have a lot of planned enhancements in the pipeline. So what's the future direction for the CPEP program? What are the next steps then moving into the rest of the financial year?
We expect to, as I mentioned, do more sensitization, but move into the private sector. We will not be forgetting our procuring entities, because we have additional training and that we want to give to them. For example, we have been looking more at performance indicators, especially for the entities that have done their basic training and onboarding to the CPEP, but now we're getting into specific areas like having them do or make their performance indicators. We are also looking at a performance development program that will sit at the same point as the CPEP and work parallel. And so the CPEP will do our day-to-day actions of the submissions, but the performance evaluation will now take into data analytics and information. When we get this data, how does it improve our public procurement process? What do we do when we see that we can upgrade these particular areas, or there are aspects that we didn't realize and now we have data and information coming in? What are we going to use that data and information to do? And that is what we're going to be looking at in our performance development program, where we are going to be seeking to assist on both sides of the coin, both procuring entities and contractors and consultants, in how they manage, perceive, look at, and basically undertake their performance. So whether that's going to be additional training, whether that's going to be discussions, we're still working through some of the details, but what we know of the performance development program is that it will pick up from the CPEP in terms of the challenges there and the obstacles, and hone in on those. And that is what we're hoping to get, or expecting to get really, when we have our reports coming in, because we want to base the to-do in the performance development program on what we're seeing coming in from our PEs and from our contractors and consultants.
Okay, so you're speaking of data, information, generating data sets, valuable information is going to be used to improve the overall public procurement system. And in an age now of data, it's a data revolution really happening. Are there plans afoot to integrate artificial intelligence within the CPEP program?
We plan to enhance the DVBI platform. We're already starting some enhancements, and in introducing AI into the platform is already part of the discussion and part of the route that we're going to be doing. We expect that the platform, once we have all entities reporting, and of course our contracts go through different stages, large, small, long, short. So we plan to have quite a lot of information in there. And we know that having AI and other refinements will make that data easier to collect, obtain, analyze, report on. And so we're able to actually improve the mechanics of what happens after. So we're not just doing activities in a vacuum. we are doing activities that are validated and data-driven, and that allows us to make a better and more far-reaching input with the CPEP as we grow.
We're integrating, we are using business intelligence, we're improving process flows. A lot is happening. So let's share a nugget though. I'd like you to share a nugget with the inquiring minds out there who wants to get on to the CPEP program. What sort of nuggets do you have for them to enlist within this program?
If they're new and we have not tapped them as yet, the first thing, of course, is for us to do our sensitization training and onboarding on the platform. But if they've been trained and sensitized, the biggest nugget is to practice, to get on the platform, because if we don't go on the platform and start working on the platform, as with many things, we will lose the information. And then when something comes up 2, 4, 6 months later, then that training that we've given may have evaporated. So one of the things is to get on the platform, look at the platform. Even if something is not immediately ready, make sure you're familiar with the platform, you keep your password safe, and you practice. The second is to collaborate internally, because there are so many different departments and functions within the entity that we do not keep this as a silo, so that we have interaction within the different functions. So as soon as the learning has taken place, wherever it's taken place, then it's brought back to the entity, and that start of the integration inside the entity of how it's be done, who is going to be involved, who will do the interface, who will be on the platform, all of that starts at that point, and it's not delayed until some later date.
Okay. And for our contractors and consultants, what's the word to them in terms of the system, in terms of improving their performance?
For the contractors and consultants, we of course will be calling you, because as your contracts come on the portal and we are seeking to onboard you and sensitize you, we will definitely be contacting. And for those contractors and consultants who are already on the portal, as we do have, make sure you see your reports. Make sure you know that your reports are there. Make sure your performance indicators are somewhere in your purview as you work, so that you're tracking your performance indicators and you're aware of them, not surprised by a report, and they are on point.
Okay, all right. So I'm sure we want to know how to get further information on the CPEP program.
The policy document, the circular, and the Ministry of Finance's circular guidance note can be found on the PPC website under documents, and you can download their public documents. So that gives a great view into what exactly, or all the details as to what is happening, what should be happening. As for details on training, sensitization, and anything or any question of those documents, they can reach out to the Contractor Performance Monitoring Branch at the Public Procurement Commission.
Okay, wonderful. So folks, it's bold, it's innovative, game-changing. A lot is happening in the public procurement landscape, and we're very excited, we're very thrilled to bring all of this good news to you. So we want to thank Cheyenne McClarty for this wonderful explanation of the CPEP program. And you're always welcome back on the podcast to give us further insights. All right?
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.